Have you ever noticed how we're obsessed with generational labels? Boomers destroyed the economy. Millennials killed off napkins. Gen Z can't look away from their phones. But sandwiched right in the middle, there's an entire generation nobody talks about. Generation X, born somewhere between 1965 and 1980. They're the coworkers who get everything done without making noise about it, the parent who raised you but never needed the credit, the people who built the internet everyone is addicted to, yet barely have a social media presence themselves. And here's what nobody wants to admit. Their psychology might be the most fascinating and misunderstood of any generation currently alive. Let's begin with what defined them more than anything. They were latchkey kids. And I don't mean just a few of them had to let themselves in after school. This was the standard for millions. Picture this scene. The year is 1978. You're 8 years old. The school bus drops you off. You walk to your house, pull out that key dangling from a shoelace around your neck, and let yourself into an empty home. No parents, no babysitter, no iPad to FaceTime your mom, no Ring doorbell for check-ins. You are simply alone. You pour some cereal, turn on the TV, all 4 channels, and you wait. By 1984, roughly 7 million children between the ages of 5 and 13 were regularly unsupervised after school. 7 million. That's not some isolated occurrence. That's an entire generation learning at a very young age that nobody is coming to save you. Figure it out on your own. And that empty house literally rewired their brains. It taught them that consequences are both real and immediate. You couldn't text your mom for permission. You had no Google to tell you what to do. You made a choice and lived with whatever happened next. When your parents finally came home, discipline wasn't a discussion. It wasn't some feelings-focused family meeting. You made a mistake, you faced punishment. That was the end of it. No room for appeals. Psychologists call this a high-contingency environment. Actions and outcomes are connected directly with no buffer in between. Your brain gets wired to think 2-3 steps ahead because it had to. That's why Gen X has this almost eerie ability to see problems approaching before they hit. They are not pessimists. They are running constant simulations in their heads because that's how they survived. But here's where the story gets darker. Gen X watched their parents preach one thing and practice another. All that talk about commitment, loyalty, and doing the right thing. Then, divorce rates exploded throughout the 70s and 80s. They watched their fathers give 30 years to a company, only to receive a pink slip during the next round of downsizing. The message hit hard. The system will always betray you. People will inevitably let you down. Promises are ultimately worthless. Psychologists label it defensive pessimism, but Gen X just calls it Tuesday. They still hope for the best, sure, but they always plan for the worst because in their experience, the worst shows up fairly regularly. This isn't cynicism, it's pattern recognition, and it forged an emotional armor that makes them seem detached when really they're just protecting themselves from inevitable disappointment. This is precisely why you barely see them on social media. Not because they fail to understand technology. Remember, they built most of it. It's because they grew up in a time when privacy was simply normal. When you did something embarrassing as a teenager, maybe 10 people knew.
Maybe it came up at one party, but it never lived forever on the internet. No permanent record of every foolish thing you said or wore. To Gen X, broadcasting your entire life online doesn't feel liberating. It feels dangerous, exposed, and vulnerable. They learned early on that the less people know about you, the safer you are. So they watch, they lurk, they observe, but they don't participate. Not because they can't, but because they remember what privacy felt like, and they're not giving it up for likes. Then there's the irony factor. Gen X practically weaponized ironic detachment. Everything is a joke. Nothing is that serious. Always keep it light. Just keep moving. Never let anyone see that you care too much. So where did this come from? Try growing up right in the middle of the Cold War. They ran nuclear fallout drills in elementary school. Teachers calmly explained how to duck under your desk when the bombs dropped, as if plywood could protect you from thermonuclear war. Adults behaved as though total annihilation could happen on any random Tuesday. But also, don't worry about it. Everything is fine. When you're raised in that kind of split reality, you learn to hold contradictions comfortably. You learn to laugh so you won't scream. You keep your distance from everything, because attachment feels like setting yourself up for pain. But despite all of this, the neglect, the instability, the constant mixed messages, Gen X developed one of the most remarkable work ethics of any generation. They never talk about it. They don't post LinkedIn manifestos celebrating hustle culture. They simply show up and do the work. This was forged early through jobs that seem almost prehistoric now. Paper routes at 5 a.m, where a 12-year-old was responsible for delivering newspapers to hundreds of homes, bagging groceries, running registers at fast food places where you had to calculate change in your head when the system went down. These weren't resume builders. They were raw, unfiltered introductions to genuine adult responsibility. They watched their parents get chewed up and spit out by corporate America, so they never believed in company loyalty. But they became obsessed with being competent, with being indispensable. They can't control whether they will get laid off. They learned that early. But they can control whether they're the last person anyone would ever want to let go. So they make themselves indispensable, quietly, without fanfare. There's a paradox at the very core of Gen X. They are simultaneously the most independent generation and the most quietly collaborative. They will never ask you for help. They've been solving their own problems since they were 8 years old. But if you need help, they will show up. No drama, no post about what good people they are. They just do it. This stems from forming deep friendships out of necessity. When parents were absent, your friends became your family because they simply had to. And that loyalty stuck. Now let's talk about authority, because their relationship with it is complicated in a very specific way. Gen X respects competence, never titles. If you've earned your position through real skill and knowledge, they'll follow you anywhere. But if you're just some executive who speaks well but doesn't know what they're doing, there's zero patience for you. They will quietly undermine you while smiling right to your face. They question authority because they watched incompetent authority figures make catastrophic decisions throughout their entire lives. Watergate, Iran-Contra, the AIDS crisis handled with criminal negligence, Vietnam, economic policies that hollowed out the middle class. They learned this young.
People in charge don't necessarily have any idea what they're doing, and blind obedience is for fools. Economically, Gen X got hammered time and again. The oldest ones graduated directly into a recession. The middle ones got hit by the dot-com crash. The youngest came of age just as 2008 obliterated the economy. They've been economically traumatized again and again, which is why so many of them have multiple income streams. Not because they're inherently entrepreneurial, but because they've learned viscerally that nothing lasts. Every job is inherently temporary. Every company will eventually fail you, downsize, or die. This created significant psychological baggage. Research shows that Gen Xers report significantly lower rates of seeking social support during times of stress. Not because they lack people to ask, but because asking feels like weakness, like failure. They were raised to handle everything alone, and that programming runs very deep. It makes them incredibly capable in a crisis, but it also means they struggle with vulnerability, with letting people in, with admitting that they might need help. Their relationship with information is different as well. Before Google existed, knowledge had real weight.
Gen X spent hours in libraries flipping through card catalogs, hunting for one specific book that might have the answer. Information required effort, time, and physical labor, and because of that, what they learned stuck differently. When information costs you something to obtain, your brain retains it more permanently. They learned to fix things with their hands because that's simply what you did. A bike chain slips, you flip it upside down, you get grease on your fingers, you figure it out. The TV goes fuzzy, you smack it until it works. Nobody ever called a technician. You simply became the technician. This built a mechanical intuition, a belief that with enough patience and the right tool, you could master the physical world. And now they're raising children in a completely different universe. Helicopter parents, constant supervision, social media documenting every single moment. They gave their children the attention they themselves never had. But sometimes they worry they've made them too soft, too dependent, too visible. Because in the Gen X worldview, being visible means being vulnerable, and vulnerability gets you hurt. Here's the real truth. Generation X might be the last generation that truly remembers what it means to be bored, to sit alone with your thoughts, to solve a problem without instantly searching for the answer. They're not better than other generations, just different, shaped by a specific moment in history when the old world was dying, but the new one hadn't arrived yet. They are the bridge generation, the middle child of modern history. And bridges never get parades. They don't receive recognition. They're just there, doing the work, holding everything together, expecting nothing in return. And honestly, that is the most Gen X thing of all. Not caring whether anyone notices, not needing the credit, just getting it done and moving on. If this resonated with you, if you're Gen X and finally felt seen, or if you're from another generation and now understand your parents or that coworker who never talks about themselves, go ahead and subscribe. I truly appreciate you being here.